Daniel chapter 3, verses 8 through 18. Above all, we must obey God. If you would like to stand for the reading of the Lord's word, you may. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." The word of the Lord. You may be seated. Above all, we must obey God. No incident in the Bible more clearly illustrates Peter's words in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. We must obey God rather than men. Down through the years, this section of Daniel has been a tremendous encouragement to God's persecuted people. Up to this point in our journey through Daniel, these three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, have hardly even been mentioned. But as we approach today's text, Nebuchadnezzar's decree has gone out. The music has begun to play. Untold numbers of people are bowing before the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had made. And suddenly, seemingly just out of the blue, a group of Chaldeans, that was the citizenry of Babylon, they called the king's attention to something. Listen to verse 12. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Of course, they named them. These men, O king, pay no attention to you, and they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Verse 12. Now, before we move forward in the text this morning, I want to bring out two seemingly inconspicuous principles about what we have just read and that which we will begin to address in the remaining verses. These are seemingly inconspicuous principles. If we don't really dig down into the text deeply, these are principles that are easily overlooked, right? Here's the first one. People of faith do not make a big deal out of their acts of faithfulness to God. We don't see where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are calling attention to themselves for obeying God, for being faithful, to not bow before that golden image. And this is a principle that we need to be aware of if we profess faith in Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter in what way or ways we are faithful to God. The people of God do not make a big deal out of their faithfulness. And the second principle, easily overlooked, is this. People of faith do not draw attention to themselves that they are different from other people. As if, hey, I just want you to look, I'm a Christian. People of faith don't do that. They see no need to draw attention to themselves, either in their faithful service, their faithful acts of obedience, nor do they see a need to draw attention to themselves that they are different from those who don't know Christ. Here's what the people of God do. They let their actions speak for themselves. They just let their actions speak for themselves. You see, it was the Chaldeans who drew attention to these three young men. And make no mistake about it, these Chaldeans, this was not some spur-of-the-moment accusation. They didn't just decide on the spur of the moment to bring this matter to the king's attention. Oh yeah, make no mistake about it. They had been looking, they had been planning, strategizing how to accuse these three young men. And here's why. Because clearly they were jealous of them. Clearly they were jealous of them. How do we know that? Verse 12 again. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Now look back at verse 8. They accused them. But here in verse 12, there's this interesting statement that they're making to the king. What do these Chaldeans know about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? These three young Jewish men who by now are probably, 18, 19 years old. They see the need, these Chaldeans, they see the need to bring to the king's attention a certain reality. Here it is. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. And then you look back at verse 8, they accused them. They were jealous of them. In verse 8, the word that we see translated accused literally means, in the Hebrew, literally means ate them to pieces. There's another shade of meaning to this Hebrew word, to get one's teeth into. So what's depicted in this Hebrew word? It depicts a raging, teeth-grinding jealousy. A raging, teeth-grinding jealousy. What's more, these accusing Chaldeans were almost certainly men who had been removed from their former positions of power and influence. and had been replaced by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They didn't like it at all. There are certain Jews. Oh, their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're the ones you placed in our positions. You see, these Chaldeans knew their king. They knew what pleased him. They knew what angered him. And they knew what moved him to act swiftly. And they also knew that King Nebuchadnezzar was not a true convert to the God whom Daniel served. They knew that. All they needed to do was mention the unwillingness of these three Hebrews to obey his instructions. They knew that's all they needed to do. They knew that Nebuchadnezzar was so prideful, was so egotistical, that all they had to do is say, you commanded that everyone, when they heard the music, bow before the golden image you have had set up. By the way, a golden image of Nebuchadnezzar himself, and they're not doing it. And he went ballistic, and they knew he would. So let's move to verses 13, 14, and 15. I'm going to read those again. Daniel 3, beginning with verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in what? Furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Mind you, that was a golden image of himself. He demanded to be worshiped. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Arrogant rascal. I want to especially call attention to Nebuchadnezzar's last statement in verse 15. His very last words recorded in verse 15. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? And so now we come to their response. What was their response to Nebuchadnezzar? To his command, to his threatening their life. What was their response? Here it is. Let's break it down. In verses 16 and 17, follow along. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. In 2025 vernacular, Southern vernacular, really and truly, we don't even need to waste our breath giving you an answer. That's right. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. In other words, he's able, and if he's willing, he'll deliver us out of your hand. So here is their response that you just heard is based upon this. They were confident in the power of God. That's it. They were confident in the power of God. If you're taking notes, write that down. They were confident in the power of God. So my question for you and for me, for all of us is, are we confident in the power of God? You see, trust in God, confidence in God's power implies a settled belief in his omnipotence, his all-powerfulness. That's what omnipotence means. God is all-powerful. No one on earth is a match for God. Nebuchadnezzar was no match for God. Nebuchadnezzar's false gods weren't even real. The largest armies on the face of the earth are no match for God. God is all-powerful. They were confident in that God is all-powerful. They believed, they understood that he was indeed omnipotent. You see, it's one thing to say, oh yes, yes. I've been taught that all my life. I heard it in Sunday school. I've heard it in sermons. I've heard it, when I've listened to preachers on the radio, that God is all powerful. It's one thing to verbalize that because we have a mental assent to that reality. We've been taught that God is all powerful. Our Sunday school teachers taught us. We've heard our grandmothers and grandfathers say it. We've heard our parents say it, perhaps. We've heard the preacher say it. God is all powerful. And so we kind of take on that, I believe God is all powerful. But let me tell you something. It's quite another thing to believe that God can do what is completely contrary to nature, such as save you if you find yourself in a burning fiery furnace. See, it's easy to say, I believe God's all powerful until they're about to throw your behind in a burning furnace. Do you believe then? Do you believe when it really counts? Do you really believe when you're the one on your knees and an Islamic jihadist is behind you with a sword and he's about to behead you? Do you really believe that God is omnipotent? Do we really believe that God is able to deliver us even should we find ourselves in a circumstance in which if he delivers us, it violates every law of nature that we understand? On what did these young men base their confidence that God could preserve them? Because their words were, our God is able. What did they base that confidence on? That God could preserve them, that he was able to preserve them. Well, they knew the Word of God. They knew that God's Word declares that God preserves and keeps his people if he so chooses. And he can do it contrary to all danger. As with all true faith, listen carefully to this. As with all true faith in God, their confidence was not blind to their present realities, nor was their faith contrary to the fact that God works out his purposes in the way he chooses, not in the way they might have chosen. Live or die, they believed that their God was omnipotent. And nothing could happen to them without his sovereign power overseeing it all. So they were confident in the power of God. That's what enabled them to respond the way they did. I mean, can you imagine being 18, 19, 20 years old, and here's the most powerful man on the face of the earth. He rules over all known speaking peoples. I mean, unfettered earthly power. If he says you live, you live. If he says you die, you die. And you're going to stand there at 18, 19, 20 years old, and you're going to say to him, we don't even have to waste our breath giving you an answer. You can't do that unless you believe the God whom you serve is absolutely omnipotent in power. Not Nebuchadnezzar. Your God is omnipotent in power. The second thing that enabled them to be as they were is that they were completely submissive to God's will, whatever that might be. You know, you may be thinking, well, I mean, I don't know that I'll ever need that kind of faith. How do you know? How do we know that? Just Friday, a woman in her 30s was arrested in London, England, for standing 50 feet off of a Planned Parenthood's property, standing there silently, not saying a word, not holding a picket sign, just standing there silently. The Planned Parenthood staff called the London authorities. They came and asked her what she was doing, and she said, I'm just standing here. And they said, well, what are you doing? She said, I'm praying to myself. They arrested her. That is now a violation of law in England. Oh, well, that could never come here, really? You reckon? Are you so sure? Christians being murdered in the Mideast every day. We might need to know what enabled these 3 young Hebrew boys to be able to say, we must obey God. First, they were confident in the power of God, so must we be. They were completely submissive to God's will, whatever that might be. Listen to verse 18. But if not, they just said, our God is able to deliver us out of your hand. Now listen to what they say in verse 18. But if not, he's able to deliver us, but if he doesn't, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. If you don't write anything else down, if you're taking notes, write this down today. Their faith was not in deliverance because they didn't know whether God would deliver them or not. Their faith was not in deliverance. Their faith was in God, who was able to deliver them if he so chose to do it. So their faith was not in the deliverance. Their faith was in the God who can deliver. And that's why you'll hear some of these charlatans on TV sometime. They'll say, well, if you had enough faith, God would have healed you. The problem wasn't me as a faith healer. The problem was you not having enough faith. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Jesus and the apostles both healed people regardless of faith. And that's how they sell people these bills of goods. When if they were true healers, they'd just go empty all the hospitals out and put them all out of business. Has nothing to do. Our faith cannot be in our deliverance as children of God. If we find ourselves in a very hard spot, our faith has to be in the one who can deliver if it pleases him to do so. You see, these three young men remind me of Job. You remember Job, right? Job, in Job 13:15, he didn't understand he didn't have all of the answers as to why he was going through what he was going through. Here was Job. He had lost all of his children in one day, all of them. He had lost all of his flocks, all of his cattle. And now he's lost his health. He's lost his health. He feels physically as if he'll die at any moment. He has no earthly idea why all of this is happening to him. But what is his response? Even though he slays me, I will hope in him. How could he say that? I'll tell you how he could say that. Because he understood and was confident in the power of God. He knew that God was good. He knew that God loved him, and he knew that God could deliver him if he wanted to deliver him, but he was completely submissive to whatever pleased God for his life. So whether in life or in death, these three young Hebrew men wanted to glorify God in their bodies. And all that mattered to them was that the name of God be exalted. Did you hear that? The only thing that mattered to them was that the name of God be exalted. That God, the one true living God of heaven, be glorified. They weren't out to make a name for themselves. They didn't need to be seen by others and say, oh, wow, look how faithful they are. Look how much they trust God. Their only thing was whether in life or in death, I desire to glorify God. They knew that if they died, their faithful testimony would display the worthiness of their God and the unworthiness of Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. They knew that if they lived, God's name would be vindicated. And so by standing firm, they presented themselves what? Faithful to God. Faithful to God. Above all, we must obey God. As I begin to kind of bring everything down now and bring it home for us, these three young men would not have considered death to be a failure of faith. Well, if they'd have just had enough faith, God would have delivered them from the fire. No, that is not how it works. That is not what the text clearly says. They clearly had enough faith. But they knew that God has a purpose for every one of his children. And they trusted God's purpose for them, whether it be living or dying. And so, they would not have considered their death in a fire to be a failure of their faith. Rather, are you ready for this? Their deaths in the fire would simply be an indication that that was the will of God for them. Do you know how liberating that is if you really understand these principles of Scripture? God has a purpose and a plan for my life. My only job is to be faithful to my Lord, to obey my God. When man's commands stand in opposition to what my God teaches in His Word, I must stand with God and against men or governments or anything else, or popular opinion or the cultural norms. I must stand with God. That is my only obligation, to be faithful to my Lord. So yes, they knew the flames could be quenched. And yet, when we look at Hebrews chapter 11, verses 35 and 37, what do we hear? There were other children of God who had faith in the Lord. They had confidence in God, right? They were faithful to the Lord. And yet we read of them. Are you ready to hear about them? I got about 3 more minutes. Don't go to sleep on me, because I got about 40 more minutes of material here. I always do that. So here's some other children of God. Some were tortured, refusing to accept their release, so that they might be raised to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, and they were killed with the sword. The world was not worthy of them. Now, these were also faithful men and women of God. And the Lord did not deliver them from being stoned to death, from being sawn in two, from being thrust through with a sword, from being crucified on a Roman cross in Rome. The Lord did not deliver them. Does that mean that their deaths were in vain? Does that mean that their faith was misplaced? Does that mean that they had no confidence in God and therefore they weren't delivered? No, it doesn't mean any of that. These were faithful men and women. God's sovereign, omnipotent purpose for them was that in death, even in death, their faithfulness and obedience to Him would echo down through all of church history. These men and women are listed in Hebrews chapter 11, the great chapter of faith in the entire Bible. Their deaths were not in vain. Their deaths resound to the sovereign purpose of God, and even in death, He got glory from their faithful stance for Him. Now, I don't know what God has for my future. I don't know what I may have to endure, and neither do you. But what this text teaches us is that we must be willing to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We must be willing to follow Him, whatever His purpose is for us and whatever it leads us into. None of us can live by faith if we fail to grasp these principles. The last thing I'm going to say, I think it's very important. These young men didn't just, there's strength in numbers, right? Have you ever heard that? Huh? You get 3, 4, 5, 6 young boys together outside playing. That's a recipe for danger right there. And all of them say to one of them, I double dog dare you to jump up in that pine tree and get up there, way up there in the top of it, and knock some of them green pine cones out for us. I ain't climbing up there. You ain't nothing but a chicken. You ain't a buck, 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 buck. And then another one says, well, I'll go up there with you. Well, he ready to go now, because there's strength. That he's still a complete buffoon, but he's ready to go because somebody else is willing to be a buffoon with him. These 3 young Hebrew guys did not just say, I won't bow if you don't bow. Okay, if you don't, now you got to promise me you won't bow. Don't you leave me hanging out dry. No, we all 3, we're not. That is not what happened. That is not what happened. The reason they were able to stand firm the way they did is because their faith, they had stood strong in previous testings that the book of Daniel doesn't even tell us about. They had already stood firm for the Lord. And the longer you stand firm, the more you stand firm, the stronger your faith and your resolve becomes. It's just like exercising muscles, right? If you want muscles, you got to exercise them. The same thing is true with our faith. I heard that. Well, you need to get on the stick. Isn't that what you said to me? And so it is. So it is. Just like them, you and I must win victory after victory in the inner battle for holiness and obedience. There's an old saying, each victory will help us some other to win. Above all, we must obey God, not men. The word of the Lord.